Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everyone. Tracy here. Welcome back to another episode. I am so thankful to have you joining me for another fantastic conversation. But before we dive right in, a quick word from this week's sponsor.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have an amazing guest. We have Vance Crowe. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. Vance is the founder of Legacy Interviews and host of the Ag Tribes Report. And today we're going to do a really neat episode. I'm excited to have Vance on the show. I've seen him around in the podcasting world and the online world. So I'm excited to have a conversation about podcasting, about legacy interviews, about transition planning. I'm thinking we're going to go a few different places. So Vance, do you want to share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll dive into everything else?
Sure. I'm a guy that grew up in small town central Illinois, which is right in the middle of the Midwestern part of the United States. And I wanted to do everything I could to get away from my small town. So I moved away to a city to go to college, and then I ran around the world doing a bunch of different things. I was a deckhand on a ecotourism ship. I was a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya. I worked at the World Bank. I got a degree in negotiations. And ultimately, I was invited to go work at Monsanto. And the story I always tell around that is that I only took the interview with Monsanto because I was like, who doesn't want to see inside of North Korea? Because my impression of this place, and really of modern ag, despite the fact that I'd grown up in farm country, was that it was an evil place and they were doing all these dark things. And I had an amazing interview experience where all these questions that generally the people on the outside that are watching Netflix documentaries and seeing, reading one or two books, they have all these questions to Monsanto. Well, I had a chance to ask them these things in my interview. And I get all the way done to the end of the interview, and they end up offering me a job. And the job was to be the director of millennial engagement, which meant all those people that have strong feelings about GMOs and pesticides. Yes. My job was to go talk to them. And so that re-entered me into the world of agriculture. And I spent the next 5 years traveling all over the world, the US, Canada, all over Europe, going and talking with some of the strongest critics of modern agriculture. And I would try and figure out ways to communicate why modern ag was doing what it was doing. When Bayer bought Monsanto, I left and said, I want to keep doing communications. So I still go out and give talks a lot about how to have better conversations with your critics. And then I also started this company called Legacy Interviews, where I interview individuals and couples to record their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know, where they came from and their family history.
Nice. You actually answered my first question I had for you. I was going through your LinkedIn resume. I knew you had been at Monsanto. I was vaguely aware of your story. I'm like, okay, tell me about this job, Director of Millennial Engagement. That sounded rather neat. So come again on that. So you went and met with people that were critics of agriculture. So I'd say like environmental groups. Is that who did you sit down with? And then what were you communicating?
Yeah, so a lot of them were, at the time, college grads. So
Okay.
Monsanto had gotten themselves into the position where they had technology that farmers wanted, Wall Street was totally fine with, regulators were okay with, but the general public was not on board with it. And so you had all these people that had very strong feelings about a lot of the things that Monsanto was putting into the world. And for many years, Monsanto said, why would we go talk to consumers? We don't sell anything to them. Our clients are happy with us. And this allowed the broader public to have very limited understanding of what modern ag was all about, but a lot of people telling him, this is what's making you sick, this is what's going wrong with the world. And so my job was to figure out, if you were going to try and change that, if you were going to try and make it so scientists, farmers, people working in agribusiness could go out and talk with the broader public, how would you do that? And I think initially they thought, well, why don't we come up with PR campaigns and marketing campaigns that will do this? And when I was brought into the role, I kind of brought up the idea, if the world views you as North Korea, this very dark and evil place, it doesn't matter how many billboards you put up saying, look how great the beaches are of North Korea. Nobody wants to come visit you.
Yes.
And so instead, what I did was I started offering up to any activist groups that were out there, college students that had maybe a sustainability program. Hey, if you will pay for me to come out to your group, I'll come speak to anyone. I'll answer any questions you have. And it really inverted the whole situation, because most of the time when people would confront a Monsanto person, it was when it was unexpected and it would be a clash. And
Right.
my work was really around, hey, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm just telling you what I've learned from being inside there. And if you have questions, I'll answer them the best that I can. And if you know something that I don't know, I want to know that. And if you ask me a question I don't know the answer to, I'll go find the best answer that I can and bring it back to you. And it was 5 years of really living and breathing the concerns of other people, what I was learning from modern ag, and trying to bridge that divide.
Interesting. That's some big shoulders you have to do that, because you're that big bad Monsanto guy showing up in the room. I remember being in university, actually, agriculture diploma program is what I took. And we invited Vicki Burns in. She was PETA, I think, one of the animal organizations. And I remember as students, right? You're young, you know it all, and you're in agriculture, so you want to defend your industry. I remember the vibe in that room. So that takes guts to get up there and be that person. How did you find you were received? Were people generally polite, aggressive, open? What did you find?
The very first time I ever gave a talk, it was at the University of Iowa. It'd be like going to Guelph, right? And I remember when I was on my way in, I was talking to my buddy on the phone, and he was like, look, if you can't win over this crowd at Iowa State University, you should quit your job, right? Like, this is all the ag kids. Like, you're just terrible. And I walked in there and I remember being like, these kids don't look like the ag kids I remember, but okay. And I took the slides that our PR firm had made for us. And so they were shiny. They were like, had all the, look, we need GMOs to feed a growing population. And these are all the safety studies. And they were like, we've message test these. You can know that you're going to do great. And it was a 2-hour class. So I took this slideshow and I got the whole thing done in 15 minutes. I was like, well, no, we need to feed the world. Click, click, click. Look at all the GMO studies. Click, click, click. Because I thought all these ag kids were already on my team. I wanted to get through to the end so we could do Q&A and I would have fun just talking.
Yeah.
So I get done with the presentation and I say, are there any questions? And a woman all the way at the back of the room raises her arm straight up in the air. And I said, yes, you there, do you have a question? And she points at me and she goes, I don't believe a word out of your mouth.
Wow.
And the whole crowd starts clapping and cheering. And that's when I realized I was not at the Iowa State University that I thought I was at.
Okay.
And so that was my first real experience of how are people going to react if you use the shield of PR and shiny slides and you try and make it like a buffer between you and them. And so to get out of that situation, I essentially was like, well, do you have anything more specific? And she said, yes. And she started telling me all the things that she disagreed with me on. And I didn't know what to do. So I wrote it on the chalkboard behind me. You think we're killing Indian farmers. You think we're poisoning people. You think, and I turn around and I say, is there more? And the crowd's like, yeah. And I was like, all right, well, if I try and answer these things one at a time, I'm going to feel defensive and you're not going to really like this. So why don't I take the rest of your questions one at a time and I'll try and answer them one by one. And if I at the end of class, I haven't answered all the ones behind here, I won't leave until I do.
Okay.
And that gave them a sense that like, oh, this person is here to talk with us. And it way lowered the temperature and it made it so we could have a conversation. And so from then on, for the rest of the 5 years that I was there, I always approached it that way. And I never had anything more than a couple of like minor outbursts because people could see this is a human being. He's doing the best that he can. Let's have a conversation.
Wow. That's courageous. I'm not a chicken, but man, you must, what an experience to walk into, be sitting up there and literally the mob effect, right? That was pretty good.
You know, I think like I am kind of wired to like to find the truth, and I'm totally comfortable with people disagreeing. And so, as long as our conversations were oriented towards finding what is real and what we like, what we can believe in together, it never felt like pressure. In fact, it felt like
Wow.
excitement. People really care what we're talking about, so
Yeah.
that's exciting and interesting.
Oh, that's excellent. You're obviously a great communicator. I know myself, I'm a beef farmer in Southeast Manitoba, Canada, and very often it's funny, people just have heard the mainstream narrative, right? There's usually no more facts, no more awareness. It's just Monsanto bad, big agriculture bad. Really? If you ask them to go a step further than that, most people don't know, right? They've just heard that. Same as me. I was in a health store one time and chatty Cathy, right? So I end up talking to this lady beside me about electrolytes or something that I was buying. And somehow farming came up. And she's like, "Oh, you're a farmer." Well, that's good. I said, "Yeah, I'm a beef farmer." And she said, "Well, at least you know where your meat comes from and it's not part of big agriculture." And I am a beef farmer, but at that point we were out of steak and all of that. So I buy from the store. I said, "Actually, you know what? I buy from the store just the same as you. The meat supply is safe." Really? And they just needed to hear a different perspective, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we can get inundated with one side of an idea, and then you begin to believe this is what everybody knows is true, and
Yeah.
it feels good to be on the side that of what everybody else knows to be true, and it feels bad. And I think that goes all the way back to our kind of tribal instincts. If you are, we are not optimized to find out what is true. We're optimized to find out what allows us to get along with everybody that we know. Because if you don't get along with everybody that you know in a tribe, you get pushed out of the tribe, and that's dangerous. And so you always have to fight against our natural instincts to believe what everybody else believes instead of trying to find out what's true.
Yeah, I love that. I'm all about the psychology and mindset. Okay, I could go on about that for hours. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? I want to ask you about your podcast. Tell me about your podcast, and then we'll dive into legacy interviews. So, can you share more about your show?
Yeah, so the Ag Tribes Report is, I have actually two podcasts. I have one, this is the Vance Crowe podcast, which is a long form interview show where just like you were doing, you're just talking to a person, trying to find out, what do you think? What do you know about? But the Ag Tribes Report started because I started to realize that ag was being portrayed as one monolithic group. But we all know that a cattle farmer in Manitoba and a cotton farmer in Arizona, they're different. What they care about is different. The culture is different. What they believe to be true is different. And so I decided I was going to create a podcast for agriculture and the other people that are kind of around in the periphery to talk about what is the news that's going on that's affecting the culture of agriculture. So we don't talk about commodity prices. We don't talk about, the latest and greatest sprays. We talk about what's the news going on in the world that you, as a person that's a member of the Manitoba beef cattle tribe or maybe the Canadian beef cattle tribe, what do you care about? What is going on in your world? And then we try and use that as a way to kind of represent a whole bunch of different perspectives. So each week we do a live show. And this live show, I try and make it a little bit more intense than the average podcast. Because when I'm doing a long form interview, I want to make the guest feel comfortable so that over a long period of time, they can relax and say things that they think. But in a 30-minute live show, I want to make them a little uncomfortable. So part of the show is us going through news stories. But then the other part of the show, I ask them what I call a Peter Thiel paradox, which is where I ask them, what is one thing that you believe that almost no one you know agrees with you on, or nobody in your tribe agrees with you on?
Interesting.
This is a fun question because now you're forcing them into this very awkward position because they have to first say something that you don't agree with, because if they say something you agree with, then they've already failed.
Yeah.
And then they have to say something that you don't agree with, and now they have to explain their point of view so that you can be convinced by it. And it really creates this dynamic where people are being forced to say, like, what is it that I actually believe? How do I think about problems? And it makes it for a fun, kind of intense podcast every 30 minutes every Thursday night.
Oh, that would be fun. Don't ask me what I hold to be true that others don't believe. I could give you a whole list of them.
Is that right? That's great. That's exactly what I like.
Yeah, it's fun. I like, of course, a content creator. I like to think out of the box, right? And always studying psychology. Okay, that sounds fantastic. And for anybody in the audience that is interested, I'm going to put Vance's 2 podcasts and links in the show notes. So fantastic. Let's switch gears again. What I would love to talk to you about is your legacy interviews. So I'm glad we painted the picture of your career and what you do, because it seems like storytelling, communicating is natural. So to me, this just seems like a perfect place for your career to have gone. So do you want to share more about legacy interviews, how it came about and what it is?
Sure. The legacy interview started because I had a listener to my podcast say, "Hey, I've been listening to you for years. I've got a book I'd like to drop off with you." And I said, "Sure." So he stops by and he has his 6-year-old son with him. And as soon as his son hears my voice, his eyes get really big and he's like, "You're the guy on the radio." And so I
Oh,
was like, "Oh, you listen to the podcast with your dad. Would you like to do an interview?" Well, this kid couldn't get past me fast enough. He's like already walking in before his dad even says he can. We go down. At the time, my studio was in my basement. I turn on the lights and cameras, and there he is sitting in the chair. His legs are dangling off the chair because he's only 6, right?
yeah.
And I ask him questions that a 6-year-old could answer. I say, like, "What do you think your dad does all day at work? And what food do you wish mom let you eat more of? Or who's your
Oh,
best friend?"
yeah.
And this kid is like leaning forward. He's super into it, like he's on Meet the Press.
Yeah.
And we get all done with the interview, and I package it up and I send it to his dad, and I say, "Play it for him sometime, like it's an episode on the podcast." And the dad called me up a few weeks later and he said, "Vance, I just have to tell you, the other day I was at a party and we were playing this game, and a question came up. If your house were on fire and you could only grab one thing, what would it be?" He was like, "I knew instantly it was the interview you did with my son." And he's like, I've been thinking about this for a little while, and I think it's because, one, if I had asked him those questions, he might not have answered them in the same way. I'm his dad.
Yeah.
And two, I can't go back and get it again. He's not going to be that age again. He's like, "I don't know what you should do with this, but you should do something." So I went out on my podcast and I was like, "Hey, it's a few weeks before Christmas. If anybody wants me to interview your loved ones as a Christmas present, let me know." I was expecting to get just 2 or 3. I got so many I couldn't get them all done. And that's when I realized now I get to do my favorite thing in the world, which is talk deeply with people.
Yeah.
And I get to help them be able to preserve and record their family history. So when their children or grandchildren are at that point in their lives when they're like, "I really wish I knew the stories of my grandmother," or "I really wish I knew how my dad thought about these things," they can go back and watch these videos. And it's been a really profound thing to do over the last 5 years.
I love that. I could see that. I could see why that would become a cherished keepsake, right? You don't get that back. He's not going to be that age in a year or two, right? Time flies, and those are just those precious moments. Hey, I have speaking of book, I want to share something with you, Vance, because this concept and the documenting the farm ancestors came to me a little while ago. And here's how it hit. It hit like a ton of bricks. There is a book out there called Land Rich, Cash Poor. Brian, I'm blanking on his name. I interviewed him on our show. So I think you'd really like this book, Vance. And I've also did a book review on our channel as well. What he did, he is a news reporter and he went through from before the Great Depression or the First World War, so like 1910. And he took the history of agriculture from 1910 up to the present day. And the thread line of the whole book was farmers have got left behind and the short end of the stick, so to speak, is what he's saying. And it shouldn't have happened this way. And he walks you through the history of agriculture, all of the wars, the Great Depressions, the financial crisis, COVID, and how each of those things have affected agriculture. But here's the point, connecting it to what you do and how this whole documenting your farming ancestors hit me like a ton of bricks. Here is what he did. You could see how that might be a little bit dry, right? If you're not a history buff, that could be really dry. A very rare person wants to read history. What he did, he had a dairy farm, his family. So it's fourth, fifth, sixth generation dairy farm in Wisconsin. And he went through and told the story of his farm family, right from when his great great grandpa came over from Germany during whichever war. And he started talking about and sharing them settling in the hills of Wisconsin and the hard soil. So, between telling the history of agriculture in the US, he would weave his family's story in there. The hard times, the great times, the struggles, the injuries, the death, what has made the fabric of his family to the modern day. And darn near, I was in tears a few times, and then looking back and going, I wish I had sat down like this with my grandparents and documented their stories. Because once they're gone, yes, you can get the next generation to tell them, but it's gone. So, long-winded story to share with you, but that's when this whole concept of documenting your family's history kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And when I seen what you were doing, I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. So you'd like that book. So anyways, sorry to do a little
That's
rabbit
great.
trail there.
So
but
that book was Land Rich, Cash Poor.
yeah, yeah,
Great.
and it's neat. And to me, it just expresses how important it is to document those stories, right? Because we're so generational. And the farm usually doesn't start with us. It started 4 generations ago. If we can get our grandparents' stories while they're still alive, let's do it. So dive back in and tell me about legacy interviews. How does it work?
Yeah, so what I do is oftentimes it's adult parents getting it for their parents, and they want to get it so that the grandkids can watch it, right? So oftentimes, maybe like in my case, I was in my 40s before we started having kids. By the time my kids are old enough to understand, my dad, he may be gone. And so we sit down with the grandparents, and we often will do like a full day of interviews. So mom will have an interview, dad will have an interview, and then we do an interview with them together. And we cover 5 areas. We start off talking about your ancestry. So how did your people get here? Who were your people? How did you think of yourselves? Then we talk about your childhood. And one of the things that we really focus on is not asking kind of generalist questions, tell me about your childhood. We ask really specific questions like, who did your parents spend time with? Right? So that way they can relax and they can get an image of their mind and be like, when Uncle John came over, they'd get out the ashtrays and the whiskey and they'd have a good time.
Yeah.
And so then after childhood, where we talk about your schooling and did you go to church and what kind of rules did you have? Then we talk about your career. So what did you do during your working years? What went really well? What didn't go so well? What did you learn throughout your time there? Then we talk about marriage and parenting. We spend a lot of time talking about, tell us about the kids as they were growing up. When did you see their personalities first coming out? What was important? When did you have to make a tough decision as a parent? And then, and if they're doing the couples interview, we talk about when did you first notice her? What did her parents think of you? How did you know he was the right person to commit to? And then on the final section, we call it the wisdom section, that's where we ask kind of the more ethereal concepts like, what is success? What should your future generations know about God? What is it that they should know about money? And when I talk to farmers, I would say 80% of our clients are farmers. I ask, what should your future generations know about debt? And then when we're all done with the interview, what they get is for each session that we've done, they get their own video for it. So a full day would end up being 3 interviews, mom's interviews, dad's, and then the one of them together. And it's very little edited. It's mostly just a conversation between us. But if there was like a false start or somebody says, I thought about it, I don't really want that story in there, we cut that out. But it's just a very genuine, deep conversation. Usually each session is about 2 hours long.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That is so beautiful because, once those stories are gone, they're gone, right?
Yeah, and there's so many times I've heard from people like, I didn't think you were going to get any stories out of my parents that I didn't know, but after the first 10 minutes, I heard all kinds of things I didn't know. And it's because when you're in a family, mom and dad think that they've told those stories, and the kids don't know what they don't know. And so you end up finding out so much more about, when mom took 2 years and moved to France, or when dad experienced a bankruptcy before he got married, or when they had trouble in their marriage. And you hear people talking about these real things that they would be open to talking about. It's just nobody's asked and they haven't had a reason to think about it. And that's been really amazing to hear back from our clients afterwards about how much they learned and how valuable it was to have somebody else interviewing their parents.
That's really neat. And, I don't know about you, Vance, but I think it also depends on the personality of your parents. Not all people are storytellers, right? I can look in my family and there's those charismatic few that are just always weaving a tale and telling. But for the most part, everybody's stuff is in their head unless you ask a specific question, right? And
Yeah, I mean, you know this from interviewing that it's getting them to recall a memory can open them up and get them talking. And I always make the joke that when a couple comes in, there's almost always one person that comes in like, "Let's do this," and another person like, "I don't know why we're here. I'm only here for my grandkids." And inevitably, the one with the arms crossed is the one that ends up talking, the whole time, having so much to say. And it's because they don't normally get this chance. It's not a part of either who they are, it's not really how their family culture was. So you end up getting these people that haven't even thought of some of these things in 30, 40, 50 years, and they get done walking out of there being like, "That was great. I loved it."
yeah, I I look back, and the funny thing too, why I love that you're doing this and this is coming to people's awareness, because hopefully the younger you are out there and you see this, you're like, let's do this. Because I find for the most part, as an individual, you're very busy with university, gain a career. You're very self-focused throughout these years in your life. And then now when I'm at this point in my life, and starting to reflect back and cherishing time a little bit differently. My grandparents are gone. One of the other things, too, my dad's a trucker and he was trucking since he was probably like 17, right? Back then, they didn't have age. Prime example, day to day, family events doesn't really talk about stuff. But we went camping. Somebody starts asking him about the good old trucking days. The stories. Like it was his whole life. I'm like, who are you? Like in amazing stories and just things that blew my mind. I'm like, oh, camera, please, right? It's just priceless.
Yeah, we had a chance to. One of our guests said, "Hey, I really love this. Would you want to come up and film our family watching the legacy interview?" And I'd wanted to do this for like 3 or 4 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it was a farmer up in Ontario, and he let us do it. And so I sent my videographer up there, and what we ended up capturing from his kids were like, "Oh, I just thought dad was gone all the time because he wanted to be gone. I didn't know how painful that was for him."
Yeah.
And you hear like the fiance that's, joining the family saying things like, "I really had never understood that this gruff farmer had all these thoughts behind him and why he did what he did." And so you see that there's so many conversations that because you're up close, you
Yeah.
don't always have them. And, you're not going to ask your dad, "Hey, dad, did you regret being gone for all this time?" It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
But it gives them an opportunity to share things that are really meaningful, but maybe they just didn't think or have the opportunity to say.
Yeah. I love it. I heard you mention, kind of like you just did, but I want to take this somewhere a little bit different. I've heard you mention that once I'll speak to farm families, once farm founders, the parents get engaged in this process and do this activity, you notice big shifts, like the kids. I've heard you say that the kids have come to you and said this, and this after this activity took place. Do you want to share some of those ideas?
Yeah, and you're bringing up something that like it was shocking to me when we finally figured out what was going on because people would call me up and they'd be like, "Vance, you're not going to believe this. I am on my way to the estate attorney because mom, after saying this for 15 years that she wanted to leave the farm after dad died, well, she's finally doing it. Now she's going to go move in with her sister in Minneapolis." And then you'd hear somebody else saying like, "Hey, Vance, my parents are taking their first vacation. Dad hasn't taken a vacation in 40 years. And he just announced this morning at breakfast that he and mom are going on a vacation." And so it was like, what is going on here? And I started to realize that when people get a chance to reflect on their lives, it allows them to look back, and while they've been this tense to do person, I got to get things done, I got to survive, I got to make sure the family is doing well, they never had an opportunity to go back and look at it. So during the interview, when they turn to their wife and say, we did get through that, we did avoid bankruptcy, we did come out of that, tumultuous time. And what it enables them to do is to set down this person that they were. And it allows them to recontextualize all these things that have happened to them and then feel good about what they've done. And then it's basically, I kind of make the analogy of it's like turning the page. So they're going to a new chapter of their lives, and you can tell that they now become, I don't want to say a different person, but they allow themselves to be different than who they were before they told their story. And so this is why I'm always saying legacy interviews or getting people to tell their stories is far bigger than just legacy interviews. Everyone, you should be interviewing your parents. Everybody that's listening to this should be trying to get your family members to tell their stories, because I think that it's allowing people to let go of the past and move on into a new way of being.
Interesting. There is so much that you can unpack there. I noticed when I was interviewing Brian about him telling his family story, for me, it was a moment of pausing too, right? I find we're all so incredibly busy, and you can do your life away, but something like this gives you a moment to stop and reflect too, right? And go,
Yeah, I
oh,
think
tick, tick.
I think that there used to be that when parents lived closer to their parents, right? You had grandparents, parents, and children all living together. I think what used to happen was that grandkids, when they're driving their parents crazy, grandma or granddad would scoop up that kid and set him down. Because, kids, they'll just say, why? And eventually a parent can run out. Even somebody like me that can answer a ton of questions, eventually I'm like, just stop. And I think that's when grandma and granddad used to be like, let me tell you about when I was a boy. Let me tell you about this time. And I think in our culture, in the modern society that we have, sure, we have FaceTime, but my mom's never going to tell my 4-year-old her stories about her being a little girl when they're on FaceTime. No. Not in the same way they would if they were shucking peas together, not if they were out working the ground together. And so not only are the kids not getting this wisdom passed down to them, I think there's something being lost with the grandparents, that they're not getting a chance to tell those stories, which is what enables you to let go and become that kind of wise person that we need them to be.
Ooh, that's profound. I like it. What a powerful process. Okay, I have 2 questions for you, and you can answer both or one or the other. What do you think is the hardest part of this work, and then the best part of this work? And you can speak to that for you, and then maybe even farm founders. Take that wherever you want to go with that.
I really like your term, farm founder. That's it's not one that I'm familiar with, but I think I'm going to start using it. I really like it.
Parents.
Yeah. So the hardest part about the work is that when I started this, I had this funny joke. We didn't start this because it was easy. We started it because we thought it would be easy, right? I thought you just turn on a camera, have a microphone, and you just record it and you're done. But the hardest part is actually like all of the details that go into making it happen, right? You have to help people get used to the idea that they're going to be interviewed. Then you have to prepare them with the questions. Then you have to have the day scheduled. Then you have to do the interview. Then you have to edit it. And I think this is true not just for me and my business, but this is why they record mom and dad, but they never quite get to the editing. Or they mean to interview grandma and granddad at Christmas, but they put it off. It's kind of a procrastination, and then they don't do it. And I think that it's all those steps that are really hard, but that's actually why you pay somebody to do it, so you don't procrastinate it. But that's the challenge that everybody has. The best side of this, the thing that has been the most amazing for me, is that I sit every day and I get little drips of distilled wisdom that I get to hear, that people have earned through a lifetime of difficulty. And it has profoundly shaped how I've raised my children, how I interact with my wife, what I think about God, because you cannot help but be changed by hearing all of these people who are ostensibly not telling me, right? I'm just the vehicle here. They're telling their future generations. They're leaving it all on the table. They are pushing it all out there. And it's really been the great honor of my lifetime, is to sit and be a part of hearing wisdom that can only be earned. It can't be anything other than that.
That is rather, I would say it, a sacred role, to be able to sit there and discuss with people and help them share their story. That's rather sacred and priceless.
It really is. I'm fortunate. I have an editor on my team, and he's an exceptional person. And, we often talk about, that you are handed these things, this incredible gift. It's probably the most valuable thing that people own, is the wisdom that they've earned along their way. And I get to do it from hearing it, from doing the interviews, and he gets to hear it by editing it. But we treat that as sacred. It is never repeated outside. It's never talked about in any way, but it can't help but shape the individual.
Nice. One of the things I really felt when I was reading that book, and I keep on going there because it's essentially the same process. When he shared his family's tale in the book, is like what you do with your clients. But one of the things I really liked about it really put things in perspective. Because in that book, and I imagine with your parents, farm founders, sharing their story, you hear about the hard times and struggles of previous generations that may or may not be bigger, worse, better than the ones we're going through. But there's something timeless and just helps put it into perspective when you go, oh, let's say your client is the child in their fourth generation farm family. When you hear about the grandparents and the parents going through the Great Depression, the financial crisis of the 80s, and you're in the now and you're like, oh my God, we're in a financial crisis right now. We're never going to survive. But when you look at that and you go, oh, right, look at what they've survived and they've done it and they got us here. We can get through this. That's kind of what I felt reading that book too.
Yeah, my favorite question that I ask people, it's very close to the end of the interview. So we've already talked about their life, their childhood, their, how they got married, raising kids. And I ask them the question, what was the most difficult lesson to learn that was the most valuable to know? And this question always gets people to pause and really stop and think, right? And really look back through the vast landscape of things that happened to them. And almost always they choose something that was really painful at the time, but that because of that, something new grew from it. It grew out of it. And that is so timeless. And I always know that we've succeeded if they've found one that really, oftentimes it's the first time they've ever said it, right? It's the first time they've ever been like, if I hadn't gone through this, then all these other things wouldn't have happened. And that's when you've just done something really valuable for your clients. Because now, not only did this person discover something new, but that is wisdom that their children are going to learn from. And to your point exactly, I believe that there's a lot of research that shows this. Children that know where they came from, what their family went through, what it means to be a Taylor, a Crowe, a Smith, a Johnson, then they actually have way lower rates of depression, anxiety, drug abuse, go to jail much less. And this is true even of kids that are in adopted families. when the adopted family is the stories that they hear. And it's because I think we all need to know where we came from. And so having this combination of having somebody discover something that they learned that was hard and then passing that down to children so that they know where they came from, you know that you're doing like good work into the world.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to your podcast and what you were talking about, our tribe. What's the story of our tribe, right? And those get passed down. I'm curious, are there a lot of tears from any of your clients, or do people keep it together?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like we have a steady, actually my wife was teasing me about this. She's like, I wonder how many other businesses besides doctors' offices have an actual budget line for Kleenex.
Oh,
Because we have to, right? And it's sometimes the tears, like, I have 80% of our clients are farmers. A lot of times these farmers are like, sun-beaten guys wearing their seed hat and, don't want to be here. And you'd think like maybe they cry over a sad experience, but oftentimes it's tears of joy. It's them talking about how proud they are of their children, or how much they love their wife, or how much they were able to do because this person supported them. And so the tears are not always sad tears. Sometimes they're tears of like profound joy that we don't always get to experience. And I would say one thing I really like is that these men are never embarrassed, right? They feel, by the time they are opening up enough to cry, they feel completely at ease with what they're doing.
I love that. And that's information. Had this moment activity not ever been booked, probably wouldn't have got shared, right? Those thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the things that I always tell people is, it can feel like the interview is the most valuable thing because the parents walk out of there and they feel euphoric. They've just had hours to talk. And even if they started off uncomfortable, once they get comfortable, it feels really good to reflect on these things. But about 4 weeks after we're done with the interview, we've finished editing it and we send it off to people. And when you watch it with your family, it is, I've been told, we've gotten many, many letters from people that have said like, it was so amazing to sit down and in the middle of mom's interview, we could stop and ask her questions. And we did a whole event around it where we watched mom and dad's couples interview, and the grandkids, maybe they watched for 30 minutes and then they wandered off, but we got to learn so much. And so people have this like really great experience watching the interview together. And it's a part of the whole process that is, it was unexpectedly heartwarming.
Nice. I'm going to ask you this question, and don't feel obligated to answer. If it's, I don't want you to break any confidentiality or anything, but is there like one or two stories, client interactions that just kind of stuck with you? When you think of something, you're like, oh yeah, that time. Is there one or two you want to share? I'm curious.
There's one that definitely sticks out, and I've actually spoken with her. She's given me permission to talk about this. We were doing an interview with, I hopefully won't break down while I tell you this, we were doing an interview with a woman who had been terribly abused as a child. And she started talking about this during her interview. And I think it was the first time her children knew about it, but certainly the grandkids didn't know about it. So she was trying to frame it in a way that her grandkids could understand it. And it was really difficult to hear. And one of the questions I ask people, and I always give this question away because I think it's valuable for interviewers like you, when you are talking with somebody and they say something very deep and profound and you don't know what to say, rather than scramble around to try and figure out an interesting question, I always ask, what was the lesson in that? And so it gives them a chance to reflect on it. And I took a lot of, I would say that was probably the most courageous moment I've ever had in my life, because this woman had just told me about things that she had endured that I could never imagine. And I asked her, what was the lesson in that? And I need to tell this slowly so I don't break down myself. She said, well, the lesson that I hope my grandchildren know is that we don't keep secrets in this family. And
you're going to get me, Vance.
You think about that, and that's not something I would have thought to teach my children. It just wouldn't have dawned on me. And
Right.
I went home after that interview and I talked with them about this, and I was like, there are things that we keep private in the family, but we don't keep secrets. And I wrote her and I told her about this, and she wrote me back later and was like, if there is anything that can come from all of this pain, it's that your children and
Yeah, that hits home, eh?
yeah. So to me, I have many, many, many of these, and I just think like how fortunate I am that my family will benefit from all of this.
Yeah. And I love that you shared that. What's the lesson in this? Because I try and be a good listener. I mean, I do it for a career now. Can't say I'm the best, but I notice I'm very sensitive who I share important information with. Because I always say my truth, my important stuff, as much as I'm a communicator, my important stuff doesn't get broadcasted to the world, right? And it's important and it's confidential. But what I find, and we don't get training on this, is how to handle important, deep, vulnerable information from people, because very often we are uncomfortable. We don't know what to do. And I have found where I've shared something sensitive, not something like that, fortunately, but something important when I've opened up and that person doesn't know how to hold that and they either try and fix the problem or dismiss it. It's very much like, oh, right? And I mean, that's such a beautiful way to have that person be heard because we're all in interactions with people, right? What is the lesson in that? Very neutral. Beautiful.
Yeah, and to your point, like if you can sit with discomfort, if you can be okay with not knowing what to do, then you can be present with the other person. And there is no other feeling on earth like two people being fully present with one another, not worried about how is this going to sound, not worried about like how are they perceiving me, just we're here in this emotion, happy, sad, any range in between. And that's what we all want, but it's very, very difficult to get there. And so being able to, like, I don't exactly remember how you said it, but it was very eloquent. Like being there, sitting there with somebody in that is hard to do.
It's not easy at all. I've been there for people and just sitting in that pause. And that's what you do when you're listening and letting people tell their story and their truth and their hard times and good times. Just sitting in that pause, not trying to make it okay, not trying to fix it, right? That's an amazing tip because goodness, we all know it's hard to just know what to do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, when I go back and look at old interviews, the best training is watching yourself do an interview. I'm sure you've done this where you've gone back and listened to a podcast you've done, and you're like, oh, that hurts so. Why? What was I thinking? They said this thing, and I jumped way over here. And one of the best things for me is I've learned, and anyone can learn this, you really have to trust yourself. We're always like pushing pressure on ourselves to be like, I got to come up with the right question that's going to make this person know that I'm listening to them. And I got to, and what did they just say? And, we get kind of caught up in this internal dialogue. And I've learned, because I've gotten to do hundreds of these interviews, a question will come. If you just sit and you're present with a person, something will come. The right 3-word statement, the right question. The pause is what they needed to go on because they didn't need more words. But it really comes down to trusting yourself to just not have to be in control and to know that the right thing will come.
That's beautiful. Man, this has been some extra at the end too. That's powerful stuff. Thank you for sharing. Oh, is there anything else that you wanted to share about this journey that you've been on? What you're challenged by, what you're excited about going forward?
I think the best thing that I can say about all of this is everyone should be doing this, and you don't necessarily need me to do it. And we've helped people. People will call us up and say, "Hey, I can't afford that," or "My parents can't get there," or we'd rather do it ourselves. I will give away the questions that we use. We call them thought starter questions because every interview is unique. We will help people figure out, like, what should you worry about in your interview? It's the audio is way more important than the video. So how can you make sure you capture good audio? And we do this because knowledge, to your point that you made earlier, is being lost, and once it goes away, it's blowing away like erosion, a dust storm, where it just leaves your field and it never comes back. And I believe there's a huge amount of culture that made us who we are, the Canadians, and how they had that pioneer spirit to be able to live in these very harsh environments and to survive and thrive and have community. If we don't capture this, we won't know how they did it. And so I will do anything I can, whether it's us doing the interview or helping other people to do the interview, because this is my form of cultural erosion control, I guess, and in a way to make sure we keep that soil on your land.
I love that you said that. That was one thing I was going to say, because after I read that book, I'm like, okay, I got to take my mom. We're going to go to my grandma's sister. We're going to sit down. We're going to capture those stories. Vance, here we are, how many months later, and you've gotten busy again. What's it going to take? All of a sudden, somebody else is gone, and then I should be going coulda, woulda, shoulda again, right? And it's so important.
The thing that I always say is, I, for a long time, thought that what Legacy Interviews brought was really great cameras and editing and all this, but really what we are is a procrastination avoidance technique. We allow somebody to not procrastinate, just get it done, and then you have it, and you never have to worry about it again. You have it.
I love that. That is beautiful. And this is beautiful work. I love that you're doing this. This is so important. Vance, this has been a lovely interview. I've enjoyed getting to know you, about your show, your background, the work you're doing. If farmers are in the audience and they want to learn more, connect with you, find out about the interviews, how can they do so?
Sure. You can go to legacyinterviews.com and you can find out all about Legacy Interviews there. And if people are interested in learning about how to think about communications or how to have these better conversations, I have a page called vancecrowe.com, and that's where people bring me out to do speeches at ag conferences, at different organizations, to say, how can we get better at communicating, not just to record legacy interviews, but really to have better conversations on our operation, to have tough conversations about things like succession.
Nice. I love it. And I will put links to that in the show note, as well as your podcast. Vance, I wanted to say a big thank you for sharing your story with me, for the work you do, and for coming on this show. Thank you, Vance.
Well, thank you for having me. I want to interrupt and say you are truly a great interviewer. You have a presence about you, and I mean, I don't think in 5 years of doing interviews, I don't think I've ever cracked and cried in an interview. So thank you very much for asking such deep and thoughtful questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I truly do enjoy doing this, and I am honored that I could be in that moment with you. So thank you, Vance. You guys in the audience, if you like this episode as much as I did, like it, share it, and get it out there so everybody can hear about what Vance is doing. And like he said, most importantly, the concept, and doing it so that you capture your farm family history. So like it, share it, get it out there, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.